Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Randy Cook. Before we get into our interview today, we wanted to take just a moment to acknowledge all of our healthcare colleagues on the front lines of the COVID-19 battlefield and to express our deepest gratitude for your dedication and commitment to assure that everyone in need of your skill and expertise receive the attention and the care they need. Thank you so much for your devoted service during this crisis. And by the same token, we'd also like to give you, our audience, the opportunity to express your gratitude and to offer comments of support to our brave frontline caregivers. Whether it be a spouse, a sibling, a friend, or a neighbor, we all know someone who is serving in this way and are richly deserving of our acknowledgement. If you'd like to say thank you or give a shout out to someone for the work they're doing to keep us all safe and healthy, all you have to do is go to our website at rxforsuccesspodcast.com and click on the Contact Us tab. Once you're there, just scroll to the bottom of the page and you'll see a big red record button. All you have to do then is click that button, record your message, and then hit submit. It's just that easy. Once we receive your messages, we'll compile the recordings and play them in upcoming episodes. Thank you so much for participating, and now here's today's interview.
Paging Dr. Cook. Paging Dr. Cook. Dr. Cook, you're wanted in the OR. Dr. Cook, you're wanted in the OR.
Welcome to the Prescription for Success podcast with your host, Dr. Randy Cook.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Prescription for Success podcast. I'm Dr. Randy Cook, and I'll be your host. I have a really interesting guest today with quite a unique story, but before we get into the interview, I'd like to remind everyone that our podcast is made possible with support from MD Coaches, a company dedicated to empowering physicians to realize a greater potential and to achieve a greater level of satisfaction in their chosen fields. You can find MD Coaches on the web at mymdcoaches.com. Well, on today's program, I'll be talking with Dr. Arti Masturzo, who is the Chief Medical Officer for Misonex Incorporated. We'll hear more details about Misonex during the interview. Dr. Masturzo is a board-certified internist with nearly 2 decades in clinical practice. Early in her career, she proved herself as a successful healthcare entrepreneur, which we'll hear much more about in the interview. Currently, she is continuing to expand her role as a successful executive into the biomedical industry. Dr. Masturzo earned her undergraduate degree at the University of South Florida in Tampa, and then went on to obtain her MD at USF as well. She completed her internal medicine residency at the University of Cincinnati, and she continues to make her home in Cincinnati along with her husband of 18 years and 2 children. In her leisure time, she enjoys performing arts, especially opera and film, in addition to traveling the world with her family. So now let's hear my interview with Dr. Arti Masturzo. So today we are talking with Dr. Arti Masturzo, who makes her home up in Cincinnati, Ohio, now the Chief Medical Officer for Misonex, Inc. We're going to hear a lot more about what Misonex does and other parts of what's going on in her life these days. So, Arti, thank you very much for being here and welcome to Prescription for Success.
Great. Thanks for having me, Randy.
Well, I'm really looking forward to talking to you. You have a really interesting background, and we want to hear all about how you got to the point where you are, how you became the CMO at Misonex. So, as Alice was advised in Wonderland, the best place to start is at the beginning. So let's go there. What got you interested in a medical career to begin with? Were there medical people in your family? Was it your idea on your own? How did it start?
That's a great question. So we have in our family in total 20 plus physicians.
20.
So you can imagine over 20 in our extended family.
Good heavens. You could have your own multi-specialty clinic.
That's right. So you can imagine that dinners were very interesting or boring, depending on how you think of that. So medicine is in my blood. My grandfather started a hospital in a little village in India. That's where I was born. And he was the son of wealthy plantation owners and farmers who said, I wanted to be a physician. And he went out and became a physician, started a hospital in a very small little village, now a town, in India. My mother joined that practice. My uncle joined that practice. And so it was very much a family endeavor for many years. But I would say that if I think back, and I like your Alice in Wonderland analogy of when I really knew, it's when I was 4 years old. When I was about 4 or 5, I was a pretty rambunctious kid and had my own way of doing things.
Pardon me for interrupting, but at this point, were you in the U.S. or were you still in India?
No, I didn't come to the U.S. until a little after 6 years of age. So my mother, I remember the night, I must have been around 4.5. My mother was always on call, and she had to go deliver a baby. And this was in the middle of the night, and of course I threw a fit and I wanted to go with her. So she took me with her, and we delivered this baby, and the baby was breech. And she put me in charge of the talcum powder. She put powder on the belly, and she said, okay, I'm going to teach you how to turn this baby, and we're going to turn this baby. And she had a stethoscope in her ears. Now, you have to understand, this was in early 80s in India. And we delivered this baby. And I remember thinking, I want to do that. This is the coolest thing, that to have this gift to help people. I just thought it was magical. And so I knew then I wanted to get into healthcare.
That is so cool. And how old were you?
I was probably 4.5 years old. But she didn't have an assistant, and we were in the middle of nowhere. And I still remember it being really muddy, and it was a farmer that we delivered the baby, the farmer's wife. So I knew that it was something that was in my blood and that I was definitely going to pursue one way or the other. And having both parents as physicians, when I was around 12 or 13 years of age, I started candy striping as soon as I was able. So spent a lot of time, most of my weekends, volunteering at the hospital, and loved the interactions that my dad had with his peers, and just always thought of it as a very noble profession.
That's a great start. So you never really considered anything other than medicine, it sounds like.
It was always going to be healthcare. And part of that is just the environment. Both of my siblings, both of my brothers are physicians. My sister went her own way, and she's a chemical engineer, but she'll tell you that she's probably the most bored at the dinner table. So she feels left out, but she's probably the smartest of us all. So it is what it is. But yeah, so I went through internal medicine training. I graduated residency, and I had my eldest son, who's 16 now, Jay. I gave birth to him my 3rd year of residency. And I thought, well, let me take a year off, and then I'll start a Hem-Onc fellowship at University of Cincinnati. And I was home about a month, and I had to work. I was going nuts. Now, some of it is you can attribute to the Cincinnati weather in October, November time. It isn't exactly uplifting, but I needed to work, and I missed working. I missed seeing patients, and there was an advertisement for a hospitalist physician at a local long-term acute care hospital. and interviewed with them. And they had a daycare on site. It was Monday through Friday, no weekends, no call. And I thought, gosh, this would be ideal. I'll do this for a little bit, and then I'll start my HEMONC fellowship the year later. And they called me. So we were at the contract stage, and then they called me and said, "Oh, I'm so sorry to tell you this, but the physician that you were going to replace has changed her mind. She no longer is relocating." And I was just crushed. And they said, whoa, hold on a second. But we really liked you. And we've been talking about other places where we could use you. And the nurses at the LTAC have been saying that we don't have a physician to do wound care. And it's an LTAC, and most of our patients have wounds. And would you have any interest in wound care? And frankly, Randy, they could have asked me if I was interested in knitting blankets, and I would have said yes. I was so desperate to see patients and to get out of the house. And I said, absolutely, I would love to do wound care. Now, mind you, I'd probably seen a total of 2 wounds in my entire career before then. And so I rounded with a couple of the wound ostomy continence nurses, and about 2 weeks into it, and I remember my husband watching, it must have been football season must have started because he was a little distracted. And I said, "Scott, you're not going to believe this, but this is the coolest thing. I get to think like an internist, and I can cut like a surgeon. And it's the best of both worlds. And do you think I'm crazy if I called the oncology department and told him to give my fellowship away?" And he said, "No, I don't think you're crazy. If it's something that interests you, go for it." And so I called the oncology department and I said, "Give my spot away." And I went to the hospital. The week later, I said, "Okay, invest in me and help me really build this up, because I can get really passionate about this and really get behind this program." And so they did. And for the next 3 years, I built a wound center from scratch. I mean, it was a great team, and I was lucky to have a fantastic team of nurses. I had someone who spoke the business language who helped me put together a pro forma. I raised funds from a donor who wanted to give a donation for a meaningful project. And so that's how we paid for our first hyperbaric chamber. And for the next 3 years, we built this program. What was interesting, though, is during that time, Randy, I loved what I did. But at the time, and if you recall, because you've spent your time in surgery and wound care, there wasn't a specialty. And this was, over 16 years ago. And I was
going to say that was right at the beginning. The time period that you're talking about was right at the beginning of the era when specialized wound care was becoming a thing. So not only was it a risk for you because you had decided to give up a HEMONC fellowship, but you were actually dealing in something where nobody really knew where it was going, right?
That's exactly right. And I was an internist who spent a lot of time in the OR with the plastic surgeons I was so grateful for John Kitzmiller, who's still the head of plastic surgery at UC. He took me under his wing. I spent a lot of time in the operating room, learning to think like a surgeon and learning the techniques and getting good at cutting. And with all that said, there was a lot of fear because it was, to your point, a new path. There weren't many people doing it. And so there wasn't, in my mind, a lot of job security. And so every weekend, now mind you, I had a child at the time too. So I was working during the Monday through Friday. And on weekends, I would do a hospitalist shift at nearby hospitals. I would drive an hour for this hospital. I'd do shifts at this hospital because I had this fear that if there was no path for me in this field, that I'd still have internal medicine to go back to. And 3 years ago, if you recall, there was an organization, Save a Leg, Save a Life, that a very good friend of mine, Dr. Desmond Bell, had started. And he invited me to give a talk in Orlando. My parents still live in Tampa, Florida, where I grew up. And so I dropped by, surprised my parents, and and on that trip. And that evening, the night before the presentation, my parents said, show us your presentation. We have no idea what you do. And what's funny is for those 3 years, I was teased by my siblings and my cousins. They would text me and say, oh, I have an urgent abscess of the buttock and it needs to be trained and you need to be drained. And, because they didn't understand what I did. And so I remember showing them my slide deck. And the next morning, my father was driving me to Orlando. And I'll never forget this moment. And he said, Arti, I'm proud of all 4 of you. You guys have done tremendous things with your lives and you've made us so proud. He said, but of the 4 of you, I am proud of you most. And it just sort of shook me, right? Especially as a middle child, you can imagine. And I looked over at him and he said, and I still get very emotional and teary-eyed when I think about it. But he said, I now fully understand what you're doing. And you are helping people at the end of their ropes. You're helping people that don't have other options. And you're doing work that isn't, it doesn't have all this fame and glory and financial incentives. You're doing it because you're passionate about it, and you're helping people that other people either don't know how to help or don't want to help. And I just want you to know, I know you get teased by your siblings and your cousins. I just want you to know that you have my blessings, and you should embrace this and pursue it with passion. That
was really insightful of your dad. I bet it meant so much to you.
Oh gosh, I stopped doing hospital shifts after that. And that was a turning point for me. And I think, when I think about what the topic of this podcast is, the prescription for success is, I think that's what my father was trying to tell me, is you found purpose. You found this thing that you can impact. And so what's holding you back? And a mentor later had told me when I was in business school, she had said, you can't be great at 2 things. You can be good at one thing and truly great at one thing. But if you really, really want to be the best that you can be, choose one thing that you're going to be great at. And so that was, I think, a big turning point for me professionally, is having that conversation with my father. And so it's a very long-winded answer to your original question, which is how did I get here? That's how I got here.
Well, I got to tell you, it's probably the best answer that I've ever heard. That is really a great story. Gee, I would like to say something really nice about your dad, because my goodness, what a wonderful thing to do for your daughter. That's really terrific. And your insightfulness and his insightfulness about the reward in taking care of patients with chronic wounds, because they literally are. And I haven't really talked much about my own career on this podcast, but it impressed me that what you said is so true, and that is the chronic wound care patients are people that nobody really wants to see, and that is exactly where the great reward is, I think. But enough about me. I want to get back to you. I want to hear a little bit more about your journey. We always like to hear about the steps that people go through to get where they are. Now, you told me that I guess the family moved from India to South Florida, to the Tampa Bay area. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And so you did your undergraduate studies at University of South Florida and medical school as well. Is that correct?
I did. I did my undergraduate. I got a BS in biology at University of South Florida in Tampa. And then I also did my medical school education at the College of Medicine in Tampa.
And I'm always interested at that particular era of your life. Were there any particular challenges? Were there points where you felt like maybe this is not where I belong, or was it just smooth sailing all the way and you felt like you fit like a glove? What were those years like?
Wow, that's a great question. So on the outside, anybody looking at me, Randy, would have said, that girl's got it all figured out. She has this all figured out. Everything is going perfectly as she planned it. And it's so smooth. Looking back now, I will say that was completely false. I graduated high school at 16. I'm a September birthday. So I started college at the age of 16. And I started medical school at the age of 19. And the reason that happened is because when I started high school, I sat down with my brother, who was a few years older than me, and I said, okay, tell me which AP classes I need to take and scope all of this out for me so I can take a year off of undergrad. So I would say, and again, I think later on as we talk about the journey, the professional and the personal journey that we all take, I didn't know what I didn't know back then. And so on paper, what looked like a very smooth, effortless process came at a cost. And the cost is that I didn't have a lot of the experiences that typical 16 to 20-year-olds have. And so the process, I would say, was smooth. The things that were driving me to do it are still things, as from a personal standpoint, that I still am working on to better understand how I got here. Because I think that's the question, right? Is if you can get a really good understanding of how you got here, it helps you then design what your next steps are going to be. And the journey through undergrad and med school was very fast. It was very purposeful, and it was extremely disciplined, is the only way I can describe it. And that's not to say that I didn't have fun in undergraduate. It was a different kind of fun. I had great friends. I do wonder if I had maybe stopped to smell the roses a little bit more, if I would have had less stress earlier on. With all that said, those things that drove me have also led to the ability to have children at a young age and to develop a career at a young age. And so it's all in all a very positive thing. But those years of my life went by very fast.
Yeah, it sounds to me like you always kept your eye on the target and never really had any doubts that you were doing the right thing. But I don't think I've ever met a soul, particularly people in the more focused professions, that didn't feel that they were stressed along the way. And it sounds like you dealt with it about as well as anybody that I've ever heard. So after medical school, you made the decision to go into an internal medicine postgraduate training. And was that because ultimately at that point you were already thinking about hematology oncology? Or I guess I'm asking the question because you sound to me like a very task-oriented person who would have made a good surgeon. And yet, at least in the beginning, you were focusing your attention on a less task-oriented specialty. So what can you tell me about that?
Oh, wow, you're asking some very insightful questions, Randy. So my third year and fourth year, the second half of my my fourth year rotations were predominantly surgical in nature. I wanted to be a surgeon. And that's actually where I learned how to curse like a sailor, in case you're wondering.
Oh, is that where it came from?
That is where it came from. So I want
hanging around surgeons. You would blame it on us.
I would totally blame it on you. So I wanted to be a surgeon. And what happened is my husband, Scott, had proposed third year of medical school. I chose all surgical electives because that's what I wanted to do. And then as we started getting closer to the marriage date or the wedding date, I really thought, I really want to have children. I want to be there for them, and I want to be able to have work-life balance. And which now, in 20-something years later, I realized there's no such thing as work-life balance because it's all relative for each individual. But back then, again, I was very young. You have to understand this is when I was, 21 years old. And so of all the other specialties, internal medicine, what I liked about it is that no matter what I knew about internal medicine is no matter how much I learned, no matter how many times I read Harrison's textbook, I would never learn it all. And that really intrigued me. The challenge of just constantly learning really intrigued me. But I think looking back secretly, I knew in my mind I wasn't going to be an internist. I chose it because it fascinated me. I liked the science of it, but I knew deep down that I wasn't going to practice as an internist, that I was going to do something else, but at the time I didn't know what it was. That's
really interesting.
No, and when I look at chronic wound care, I used to say, well, I'm a wound care physician, but that's not really what I was, what I am or what I did or what I do. Chronic wound care is chronic disease management. And that's what I realized appealed to me about the field is I was managing chronic disease states, and I was managing those chronic disease states first. The fact that they happened to have a wound and I was good with my hands and be able to use my technical skills to heal them was part two of the care.
Yep, that's a great description of what chronic wound care is all about. And in my experience, I have found too few people that will embrace it that way. And as you and I both know, people get into the chronic wound care world from virtually every specialty there is. And far and away, the people that are the best at it are exactly like you say, people that understand chronic disease and also happen to have a little manual dexterity as well. So I don't want to get too far off on wound care, although because we share that history, I'm sure we could talk about it a long time. I want to move along to the latest development of your career. Now, you spent close to 20 years in patient care, right? Am I right about that?
Mm-hmm. Uh-huh.
Somewhere between 15 and 20 years. And then you made the decision to move into industry. So tell us the story of how that happened.
So there are no coincidences, right? So if you recall, earlier in the conversation, I was talking about how I was able to secure funding from a donor at the LTAC to start the hyperbaric program. And this is how little I knew. I had Googled hyperbaric oxygen chambers, and this company came up, and I called them, and a wonderful person by the name of Chris Webster responded, and she and I became friends through the process. And as she was leaving the hospital after we were all settled in and started the program, she said, I have a feeling you and I are going to be working together in like 5 years. I don't know why, just get that feeling. And I said, keep in touch, friend. About 5 years later, I get a call from Chris. And at the time, I was medical director of a hospital outpatient center in Northern Kentucky. And she said, you're not going to believe this, but I work for a company called Accellacare Wound Centers. And it's a wound management company that sets up outpatient wound care centers. And I was talking to the CEO about you, and he'd really like to meet you. And he's going to be in the area in the next week or two. I said, great. So I had dinner with the CEO, his name is Mike, along with their business development person. And the next day I had a contract in my hands. And he said, come join the executive team. And I think you'd be a great addition. You're a physician that's clearly articulate and entrepreneurial, and would love to have you on the team. And that was my first taste of private equity in industry. And I loved it. I loved it because what I wasn't getting in my day-to-day practice was that entrepreneurial, creative, let's build, let's grow, let's fix in a team environment. And it was addictive. And the ability, and I'm sure a lot of physician executives you talk to, Randy, will say this, but when you see the opportunity and you can actually see it happen in front of your face, in front of you, where instead of seeing 20, 30 patients a day, where your direct actions at a company can influence thousands of patients a day and millions of patients a year, that's when you recognize, wow, that is cool. I could see patients every day, but now I have an opportunity to work in a really dynamic environment with talented people and to affect millions of patients was for me life-changing. And so that's when I first fell in love with the business world. And what's interesting, again, and I go back to there are no coincidences and things just work out sometimes, and especially if you let them, is Excelicare was a startup. It was a small company. They couldn't afford to support me full time. And so the CEO, Mike, said, well, what if you started your own practice the other days that you're not working with us? And I said, I don't know anything about starting a practice. I've always been employed. And he said, well, we've got a doctor in Arizona who has a successful wound care practice, and I'm sure he'd be willing to talk to you. So that weekend, I spoke to him, this physician. He said, and he gave me a checklist. He said, okay, set up a PLLC, get an attorney, do this, and that. And 2 weeks later, I had Wound Specialists of Greater Cincinnati PLLC formed. Found a consultant to help me negotiate payer contracts, set up Medicare billing, got a billing company, and then I was off to the races. And in the next few years that followed, just again, based on the need of the community of the healthcare system, that practice grew to myself. I had 7 employed nurse practitioners, and we provided professional services in 25 plus nursing homes, 3 LTACs, 2 inpatient rehab units, 2 hospitals with 24/7 coverage. That was really rewarding. So it was a great opportunity because I had the ability to be on the corporate side and learn the corporate world as a physician. That was so brand new to me. And at the same time, start my own practice and grow a business in a community that I had grown up with, where I did my residency and had connections with. It was fun.
That's a really impressive story. And once again, you've demonstrated that when you make up your mind that you're ready to get things done, you don't really waste any time. That's very impressive. But take it on from there. You eventually moved after many years involved with direct patient care. You moved into a more executive position. So how did that come about?
Yep, that's right. In 2015, Healogics acquired Excelicare. And when I met with the CEO of Healogics at the time,
Healogics, and I pardon for the interruption, but I want to make sure everybody understands. At that time, Healogics, I believe, was the biggest wound care management company literally in the world, certainly in the United States. So just to put that in perspective, you can take it on from there.
No, that's right. And I was glad to point out because a lot of your listeners probably don't know who that is. But it was and still is the largest wound management company. So we sold Excelicare to Healogics in early 2015. And part of that, when you do these transactions, many of the senior leadership leave, but a lot of the senior leadership, typically the clinicians, tend to stick around. And so I had agreed to stay with Healogics post-merger. And during that time, I remember meeting with the CEO, and I said, okay, what next? Where can I help? And he said, well, we already have a chief medical officer, and we already have this, and we already have this. And I don't know what to do with you exactly. I don't know where to put you. And I said, well, here's what I'm good at. I built this practice, and let me tell you a little bit about the practice. And I described what Wound Specialists of Greater Cincinnati was able to accomplish was that, and this is probably one of my most proudest moments, is that we built a practice that reduced length of stay, that reduced readmissions, reduced cost of care, and improved outcomes for patients. And I will say that the fact that I was able to generate revenue and build this practice, doing that, it will probably still be one of the greatest things that I'm really proud of. And when he learned about that practice, he said, well, why don't you come on board with Healogics full time, and we'll buy your practice. And so I sold my practice to Healogics in December of 2015. And all of 2016, we worked, the Healogics team worked with duplicating that practice in other markets. And we duplicated that at 8 other sites. And then once that project was over, I again met with the CEO and said, okay, now what? And he said, well, I think you'd be really good at product development. And so he put me in marketing and reported to the chief marketing officer, and I was head of product development, which is where that was the most fun I've ever had in a corporate environment, just learning marketing and sales and positioning, understanding what true product development is and what true innovation is. That was really fun, and did that for a couple of years. And then one of the investors at Excelicare I had known while working there had reached out regarding some questions on Solstice Medical, and which at the time was Soluble Systems, and they the flagship product was a human skin allograft that I had used in my practice, and we had connections from many years ago, the CEO of that company and I, and so it just naturally happened that they reached out and we chatted, and they said, we're looking for a chief medical officer to join the company. And I said, well, what do you mean by chief medical officer? Because if you want a doctor to sit in a corner and say, okay, you do doctor things, then I'm not your person. And they said, no, this is it's a small company. You'll have responsibility over market access, payer coverage, and in addition to medical affairs, and you'll be a part of a very small executive team with lots of opportunity for growth. And how do you turn that down, right? So, and that's how I went to Solstice. And what was great about my experience with Solstice is, again, and you can do this in small companies, is small companies are nimble, they're extremely creative, and what a great culture the company had, and was able to work closely with sales and marketing. And when people ask me about my role, CMO, I would say very little of what I do is a typical CMO role. And most of what I do is working closely with sales, marketing, product development, medical affairs, and market access and reimbursement. So that's how I got to Solstice. We were acquired by Misonex in September of 2019, so just a few months ago. And again, it just seems like when I think of stepping stones, Randy, of how you develop professionally I always felt like you take the right risks and you just let it happen, and you follow what I call purpose or your passion. And the past few months of Misonex has been great because now not only do we have a human skin allograft, but now we've got ultrasound technologies that can really be used to change how surgery is performed for spinal procedures, for neurosurgery, for soft tissue resections in organs like the liver, et cetera. So I really feel like the sky's the limit. And this particular role, I would say, is really exciting because now I'm getting pushed to learn things that I really don't know much about. And I think that's what keeps me going, is the opportunity to learn new things.
That's a great story, Arti. And what impresses me the most about it from the very outset, your interest in the business of medicine, if you will, has always had a focus in your consciousness of what you are actually doing for people that need the service. My larger experience with physicians who move into the business world, frequently they are people who just simply have gotten tired of fighting the system in patient care, and they would be happy to have a job where somebody needs a chief medical officer in title only and sit there and not do much of anything. But you really clearly are so motivated to do something that makes a difference. And that is such a credit to you. Your background, your family, and everything about you is a terrific story. And all I can say is congratulations. You did a great job.
Well, thank you. It means a lot to me, Randy.
Well, that's a good place, Arti, for us to get into what Prescription for Success is all about, and that is when we give our guests an opportunity to share some insight into how to be successful. So I'm going to step away from the mic for a moment and give you an opportunity to share with us your prescription for success.
Great. Thank you, Randy. So hard to summarize, but I'll try to summarize it in bullet points. And I'm sure that my prescription for success a year from now will be different because it's a constant evolution, right? What we learn and who we are. And so much of what I've learned in the business world and leadership is that all of this work is really a lot of self-awareness work. And so when I think back, and if I were to try to summarize the prescription for success, I would say, I tell my kids this all the time, is rule number one, be kind to yourself so that you can be kind to others. And what I mean by that is, especially physicians or executives in general who are very driven, it's so easy to be unkind to yourself, to beat yourself up, to be your biggest critic. And if we can learn, if you can learn to be kind to yourself, you're able to be kind to others. And the second bullet I would say is, a mentor once told me, everyone has a balance sheet. And that's so true, that we all have our strengths and we all have our weaknesses. And sometimes your strengths are your weaknesses and vice versa. And if we can understand that and embrace it, we can be better leaders. We can be better executives and even physicians. We can be better parents and siblings and daughters or wives or sisters. So that would be my other thing. The other prescription for success would be to stop and smell the roses. Again, something that I see or I have seen in myself and trying to do a better job at. And I see this in a lot of folks that are very driven and focused is taking the time to give gratitude, to say thank you to the people who've helped you, say thank you to yourself and stopping to smell the roses and appreciate the work and the accomplishments that you and the people around you have had. I think one thing that doesn't ever go away is the hard work. So finding purpose and then really working hard at pursuing that purpose and doing it with a genuine love for what you're doing, I think is a big key to success. So I would, Randy, summarize that as my high-level bullets for success.
Well, thank you so much, Arti. There is a lot of wisdom in there, which is no surprise considering the things that you have shared with us about your professional journey as well. It's a fascinating story and an interesting story, and I think an inspiration for lots of people. I'm sure it will be for your children. They're bound to be very successful if they're anything like their mom. So congratulations to you on that. So we're almost ready to close it out here, but one thing we like to do before we go is make sure our listeners can follow up with you if they like. So if you'd like to share email addresses, Twitter accounts, websites, anything that you have that might help people find you and get in touch with you if they would like to, please share that with us right now.
So I'm a little behind on the social media front. I am on LinkedIn, and you can search me on LinkedIn, Arti Masturzo. My email is my full name, artimasturzo@yahoo.com, and happy to chat with your listeners at any time.
Well, again, Arti, thank you so much for spending the time with us. It's been great. It's been good to get to have an opportunity to catch up with you again. And we thank you very much for being our guest on Prescription for Success.
Thanks for having me, Randy.
And that brings to a close another episode of Prescription for Success. We hope you'll visit our website where you can review the show notes and gather a little more background information about all my guests. You can find us at rxforsuccesspodcast.com. That's our website at rxforsuccesspodcast.com. And while you're there, we hope you will subscribe. If you're enjoying the program, please help others to find us too by leaving a rating and a review on your favorite podcast distribution platform. We really appreciate your support very much. Thank you so much again for listening, and don't forget to fill your prescription for success with my next episode.